My ex-wife used to be a whore.
Husband called ex-wife a WH0RE, unaware she's married to the president. Esteemed viewers, welcome to Luxurious True Life Stories. Please like and subscribe for more captivating luxury true stories. Let's get into the story. Sarah Caleb opened the Riverside Bakery at sunrise and set aside bread for the same hungry boy who waited outside every morning. She treated everyone gently, from workers rushing to jobs to elderly customers who forgot their wallets. When an old man realized he couldn't pay, she quietly gave him the food and changed the topic so he wouldn't feel ashamed. Kindness came naturally to her, not as charity but as habit. David Oscar, a precise and ambitious financial consultant, watched from a corner table. He had entered for coffee but stayed because her behavior didn't feel rehearsed. She spoke to him politely yet without special attention, which strangely bothered him. Used to respect following his name and career, he found her indifference honest. After several visits he introduced himself, expecting curiosity, but she only asked what pastry he preferred and continued working. That evening he walked out as she gave leftover bread to the children outside. They spoke briefly about ordinary things, work, books, the river, nothing impressive, yet it felt calm. When they separated at her apartment gate, David realized he wanted to see her again, not for attraction yet, but because she made the world quieter around him. David began visiting every morning, sometimes before work, sometimes after meetings, always pretending he preferred the bakery's coffee to the expensive cafe near his office. Sarah noticed his routine but treated it normally, asking about his day the same way she asked everyone else. He slowly extended their conversations, first about work stress, then childhood habits, then books she borrowed from the public library. She spoke simply and listened carefully, never interrupting. For a man used to dominating discussions, her patience felt disarming rather than submissive. One afternoon she introduced him to her closest friend, Ruth Arthur, who arrived laughing loudly and hugging Sarah with dramatic affection. Ruth dressed elegantly and spoke confidently, immediately showing interest in David's career and achievements. David appreciated her admiration, yet found himself watching Sarah's quieter reactions more. Ruth noticed that too. Throughout the conversation she kept steering attention toward herself, joking about how she and Sarah were opposites, one ambitious, one gentle, but her smile tightened whenever David asked Sarah's opinion instead of hers. Days turned into weeks. David started waiting after closing hours so he could walk Sarah home. Their talks grew comfortable, filled with small observations rather than grand romance. He admired her steady thinking. She appreciated his reliability. Ruth joined them often, laughing along yet carefully studying their connection. When David finally asked Sarah to have dinner outside the bakery, she hesitated only because she feared changing a peaceful friendship, but she accepted. As they left together that night, Ruth watched from the sidewalk, smiling while a quiet jealousy settled firmly in her chest. Months passed and the calm companionship between David and Sarah deepened into certainty. David, who planned every detail of his career years ahead, found himself planning evenings instead, walks by the river, quiet dinners, and visits to the bookstore Sarah loved. He admired how she never tried to impress wealthy clients he introduced her to. She spoke the same way to everyone. One evening inside a quiet museum courtyard, he handed her a simple ring and asked her to build a life with him. Sarah hesitated only from emotion, not doubt, and accepted softly. For the first time, David felt a decision guided by feeling rather than calculation. The wedding was modest, held in a small garden with only a few guests. Sarah chose simplicity over display, while David allowed it because he believed peace mattered more than show, at least for her. Ruth stood beside Sarah as maid of honor, smiling brightly and guiding guests, appearing more excited than anyone. Yet every compliment directed toward the bride tightened something inside her. She had once believed David admired her confidence. Instead he chose Sarah's quiet nature. She hid the disappointment perfectly, offering warm hugs and encouraging words while memorizing every detail of their happiness. After the ceremony, the newly married couple returned to a small apartment David had prepared. Sarah arranged books and flowers, turning the space warm within hours. David watched her move comfortably through the rooms and felt satisfied. His life finally balanced ambition with calm. Ruth visited frequently during those first weeks, bringing gifts and laughter, becoming almost part of the household. Outwardly it was friendship continuing unchanged, but privately she began comparing everything: their conversations, their closeness, the way David listened to Sarah more carefully than he ever had to her. The marriage began peacefully, unaware a silent rivalry had already taken root within its walls. Life after marriage slowly shifted. David wanted influence, luxury, and polished appearances, while Sarah preferred simplicity and quiet generosity. When she gave money to help a struggling neighbor, David questioned her judgment, saying reputation and savings mattered more than emotional decisions. She listened but felt distance growing. Ruth visited frequently and subtly agreed with David's concerns. She praised his ambition and hinted that Sarah's kindness made her naive. David began noticing small things: how Sarah spoke freely with strangers, how she smiled at everyone, and instead of seeing warmth, he started seeing risk. Sarah sensed the change but believed love required patience. She tried adjusting, attending formal dinners, and staying silent when corrected. What she didn't see was that doubt had already entered her marriage, quietly settling where trust once stood. Ruth began speaking carefully around David, never accusing Sarah directly but raising small concerns. She mentioned how some men at charity centers seemed overly familiar with Sarah and wondered aloud if people misunderstood her friendliness. David dismissed it at first, yet the thought remained. Over time she repeated similar remarks in different ways, always sounding protective rather than jealous. David started paying attention to details he once ignored: long conversations Sarah had with strangers, late returns from volunteer work, grateful messages on her phone. None proved wrongdoing, but suspicion slowly replaced certainty. Sarah noticed his colder tone, but couldn't understand why. She explained her activities openly, believing honesty was enough. David nodded each time, yet doubt had already taken root, growing quietly under Ruth's gentle words. At a corporate gathering David attended alone, a colleague casually mentioned seeing his wife often surrounded by men at a community shelter. The comment was careless, yet it struck him harder than expected because it echoed Ruth's earlier hints. He defended Sarah politely, but the certainty in his voice felt weaker than before. The following days he began noticing whispers, nothing direct, just unfinished sentences when he approached conversations. A neighbor joked that Sarah was popular everywhere, and though meant harmlessly, it stayed in his mind. He returned home quieter, studying her expressions, searching for signs that didn't exist. Sarah sensed distance growing, but believed work stress caused it. She tried comforting him with patience and routine, unaware that rumor had already shaped his perception. Meanwhile Ruth listened calmly as David shared concerns, reassuring him she might be wrong while subtly confirming his fears. Ruth's jealousy hardened into decision. She contacted Alex, a struggling photographer she knew from past social events, and offered him money for a staged situation that would ruin Sarah's marriage. She explained clearly: no harm, only a false appearance strong enough to convince David. Alex hesitated but accepted when he heard the payment. She arranged a casual evening with Sarah, insisting they relax together like before. They met at her apartment, laughed, and shared drinks while Sarah spoke openly about wanting her marriage to feel peaceful again. Ruth listened with a comforting smile while quietly adding a substance into Sarah's glass. Minutes later Sarah's speech slowed and she lost consciousness on the couch. Alex entered shortly after. They positioned him beside her and loosened the scene to appear intimate, careful not to injure her. Ruth photographed everything, ensuring angles that suggested guilt. When they finished, She sent one image anonymously to David and erased traces of her involvement, leaving the room silent except for Sarah breathing, unaware her life had just been rewritten. Sarah woke hours later with a heavy head and blurred memory, finding herself alone and confused in an unfamiliar position. She assumed she had fallen asleep after exhaustion and thanked Ruth for letting her rest, unaware of what had been arranged. Ruth acted normal, even apologizing for leaving her unattended while pretending concern. At the same time, David received the anonymous message. The photo showed Sarah lying beside another man in a compromising scene. Shock quickly turned to anger. Every rumor he had heard suddenly felt confirmed. He called repeatedly, but she didn't answer immediately because she was still traveling home. When she finally entered the apartment, he was waiting in silence, phone in hand. She greeted him gently, but his expression was already hardened. Before she could explain her fatigue, he showed her the image, and the calm life she knew ended in that instant. Sarah stared at the photo in disbelief, unable to recognize the moment captured. She tried to recall the night, explaining she remembered only visiting Ruth and suddenly feeling dizzy. David refused to hear details. The image overpowered every explanation. He accused her of betrayal, his voice cold rather than loud, which hurt more than shouting. She pleaded for trust, insisting it was a setup, but each word sounded like denial to him. Months of rumors and Ruth's careful hints replayed in his mind. To David the situation felt obvious, and the lack of memory sounded like guilt. He packed her belongings quickly and placed them by the door, ending the conversation with final certainty. Sarah left the apartment trembling, carrying only a small bag. She called Ruth hoping for support, unaware of the truth waiting. Inside the now silent home, David convinced himself he had removed dishonor from his life, not realizing he had just destroyed it. Sarah found Ruth at night and begged her to help prove the truth. She explained she could not remember anything after the drink and believed someone planned it. Ruth listened quietly, then slowly smiled, no longer pretending concern. She admitted she had arranged everything because she was tired of living in Sarah's shadow and wanted the life Sarah had. The words left Sarah frozen. Ruth mocked her kindness and called it weakness, saying David would always believe evidence over trust. She revealed Alex's role and proudly described sending the photo herself. Sarah threatened to tell David, but Ruth calmly replied he would never believe a story without proof, especially after what he already saw. As Sarah stood speechless, David arrived to bring Ruth home, assuming she had been comforting the woman he had just abandoned. Ruth instantly returned to her gentle act, and David thanked her for loyalty. Watching them leave together, Sarah understood she had lost her marriage, her friend, and her home in a single night, with no way to defend herself. With nowhere to stay, Sarah walked until morning, sitting briefly at a bus station to gather strength. She sold the small jewelry she still carried and rented a tiny room for a few nights, spending hours searching for work despite exhaustion. Most employers rejected her for lack of references she no longer had access to. Eventually she accepted a temporary cleaning job at a government residence complex, grateful simply for stability. The building was larger than she expected, a guarded residence used by senior officials. She worked quietly, speaking little and avoiding attention. One afternoon she calmly helped a kitchen assistant who cut his hand, bandaging it with steady care before returning to work. Staff began noticing her reliability, and supervisors assigned her permanent duties inside the presidential villa. There she focused only on work, avoiding personal conversation. Her past felt distant yet painful, so she chose silence over explanation. Each night she read borrowed books alone in the service quarters, rebuilding confidence slowly. She did not know that someone had begun observing her composure with quiet curiosity. President Samuel Theodore first noticed Sarah when she calmly stopped an argument between two staff members without raising her voice. Instead of reporting them, she listened and helped them settle the misunderstanding. Her manner was respectful yet firm, unusual within a place where people often acted tense around authority. Samuel asked his supervisor about her and was told she was new but dependable. Days later he saw her again in the garden helping an injured bird, wrapping its wing gently before asking security to contact a wildlife center. She didn't notice him watching from a distance. What interested him was not the act itself but how naturally she moved on afterward, returning to cleaning as if nothing special had happened. Curiosity replaced casual attention. He began greeting her during routine walks through the residence. Sarah responded politely but briefly, never attempting conversation beyond respect. And like others, she never seemed eager to impress him. Samuel sensed a guarded sadness behind her calm behavior and realized she carried a story she refused to tell, which made him more interested in understanding the person she truly was. Samuel started timing his evening walks near the service courtyard where Sarah often read after work. One night he asked what she was studying and noticed it was a basic law book about civil rights. She explained she wanted to understand how innocent people could defend themselves properly. She didn't share her own past, only spoke generally, but her seriousness made him listen longer than planned. Their conversations became routine yet never personal at first, discussions about fairness, responsibility, and how power should protect rather than intimidate. Samuel found comfort in speaking without titles between them. Sarah treated him respectfully but not fearfully, correcting him once when he misunderstood a legal term. Instead of offense, he felt relief at being spoken to honestly. Weeks passed and silence between sentences became comfortable. He trusted her judgment on small matters within the residence, and she gradually relaxed around him. Neither spoke of friendship directly, yet both recognized it forming quietly. For the first time since arriving, Sarah felt safe enough to believe her future might not always be defined by what she lost. Months of quiet conversations built a steady understanding between them. Samuel admired how Sarah never asked for favors or advantage despite knowing his position. One evening he spoke openly, saying trust was rare in his life and he found it with her. She hesitated, fearing attachment could bring new pain, but his patience reassured her. He proposed privately, not with grandeur but sincerity, promising protection without control and respect without conditions. Sarah accepted carefully, wanting a life based on truth rather than image. Only his chief aide Marcus Hale witnessed the small civil ceremony arranged discreetly to avoid public attention and political pressure. Afterward Sarah continued working inside the residence to keep normalcy, while Samuel prepared the right time to introduce her publicly. Their marriage remained known only to a few, peaceful and hidden, as both understood the world outside could easily misunderstand what they had built quietly together. Away from the residence, David's career advanced quickly through aggressive networking and calculated deals. Ruth encouraged every step, pushing him toward elite gatherings and influential investors. She enjoyed the status that came with his success and began presenting herself publicly as his partner, though their relationship lacked the calm he once had. He occasionally remembered Sarah's steadiness, but dismissed it as weakness he had outgrown. Ruth reinforced that belief, praising ambition and mocking the simple life he left behind. Together they focused on entering higher political circles, convinced proximity to power meant permanent security. An invitation finally arrived, a prestigious national charity gala hosted by the president. Ruth celebrated the opportunity, seeing it as entry into the highest level of society. David accepted confidently, unaware the event would reconnect him with the past he believed he had erased. The presidential gala was held in a grand glass hall overlooking the city skyline, filled with diplomats, investors, and public figures. David arrived in a tailored suit, Ruth beside him glowing with ambition. Cameras flashed at the entrance while guests whispered about a special announcement rumored for the night. David saw opportunity in every handshake. Inside, music flowed softly and conversations circled around influence and policy. Ruth encouraged David to move confidently, reminding him this was his moment to be noticed. As they navigated the crowd, David's eyes suddenly paused across the hall. Standing alone near a marble column was Sarah, dressed elegantly yet composed, no longer in uniform. Shock quickly shifted to contempt. Ruth stiffened but masked her reaction. David interpreted Sarah's presence as proof of disgrace, assuming she had somehow attached herself to another wealthy man. Without thinking, driven by pride and unfinished anger, he stepped toward her, unaware that the evening's announcement was about to begin, and unaware that he was walking into the most irreversible moment of his life. David stopped a few steps away from Sarah, disbelief turning into harsh laughter. He accused her loudly of climbing into powerful circles through immoral means, repeating the rumor that had once destroyed their marriage. Guests nearby fell silent as his words cut through the music. Sarah remained still, refusing to argue or beg this time. Ruth watched from a distance, anxiety rising as attention shifted toward them. David continued, calling her disgraceful and claiming he had been right to remove her from his life. He believed he was exposing deception in front of elites, unaware that several security officers had already turned toward the disturbance. Before Sarah could respond, a calm voice spoke from behind David. President Samuel Theodore stepped forward, expression controlled but firm. He looked directly at David and asked quietly, "Did you just insult my wife?" The hall fell completely silent as realization drained the confidence from David's face. No one spoke after Samuel's words. Guests exchanged stunned looks while cameras lowered slowly. David stared at Sarah, then back at the president, unable to process what he had heard. Ruth's composure shattered. She stepped backward through the crowd, searching for an exit. Sarah remained calm beside Samuel, her silence more powerful than any defense she could have given. Samuel signaled security without raising his voice. Officers approached and restrained David as he tried to explain it was a misunderstanding. His earlier confidence collapsed into panic while he repeated that he had been shown proof long ago. Samuel answered only that false accusations spoken publicly carry consequences, especially when meant to humiliate. Ruth slipped out during the confusion, disappearing before anyone stopped her. As David was escorted away, he finally understood the situation he had created but could not reverse. The gala resumed slowly, yet every guest knew they had witnessed a life-change direction in a single sentence. The investigation began the same night. Samuel ordered a quiet inquiry rather than a public scandal, wanting facts before statements. Security traced the old anonymous message connected to David's accusation and eventually located Alex, the photographer who had taken the staged images. Faced with legal consequences, he confessed everything: the payment, the instructions, and Ruth's involvement. David listened during questioning as the details unfolded. Each word dismantled the certainty he had held for years. He realized Sarah had told the truth the night he expelled her, and that his anger had made him accept evidence without understanding. His silence replaced earlier denial, regret arriving too late to repair anything. Authorities located Ruth days later attempting to leave the country. Confronted with Alex's testimony, she could not deny her role. The deception that ruined her marriage and her life was documented fully, leaving no doubt about what had truly happened. The story that began with rumor ended with proof. News of the resolved case spread carefully through official statements. Sarah chose not to speak publicly about pain or revenge. Instead, she asked Samuel to support a small legal aid program for people falsely accused, using what she had learned during her hardest months. The project grew quietly, focused on dignity rather than attention. David accepted the consequences of his actions, no longer defending his past decisions. He requested to apologize once, but Sarah declined gently, saying closure did not require reopening wounds. She held no hatred, only distance. For the first time, her peace did not depend on anyone believing her. The truth already stood on its own. Life moved forward calmly. She continued walking through the residence gardens without fear of recognition or judgment. The past remained part of her story, but no longer defined it. What began with loss ended with stability, not through revenge but through a life rebuilt on trust that could not be taken again. As this story comes to an end, remember that behind every luxury lies a truth few ever see. If this story moved you, support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Until the next unforgettable true story, stay inspired and stay curious.